Warning: All Things Crime is a true crime production that may contain violent or disturbing material. Viewer or listener discretion is advised.
Yes and no. So, DNA actually was started in criminal investigation mid 80s, but the technologies were clunky. So, initially when you're using RFLP in the mid 1980s, first of all, the testing would take 6 weeks. You would need a lot of DNA. You'd need a blood stain the size of a dime. So even, 80s, 90s, yeah, we had DNA, but it wasn't able to resolve as many cases as it is now, just because of the limitations of the technology. And so there's very often, I'm looking at a post-conviction case and testing that was done 5 years ago. I'm like, that was inconclusive. If we did that today, we could probably get an answer, just with the current evolution of the technology in a few years.
Yeah. And like I said, it's almost like a hockey stick. It's going up so fast that even something that was done, like you said, 5 years ago, if it wasn't done with the latest technology, then perhaps it needs to be run again.
So, all right. So now we get the evidence to the laboratory, and, the analyst will look at it. The first question is, well, can I identify a body fluid? Is there blood? Is there semen? Is there saliva? And if not, how and where am I going to sample this? And that's going to take some common sense. A great example is, let's say that there's a ligature that's found, like a piece of rope. If you were just to run a swab around the whole length of the rope, you're going to get a pretty bad mixture. So if you think about the mechanics of it, the person doing the strangling is probably touching the rope on the ends of it to get leverage. So that's where you'd expect to find predominantly the offender's DNA. In the middle would be where it would be in contact with the victim. Right. So, a classical way to break down the sampling is break it into 3 or 4 quadrants, because you're going to get different relative proportions of the mixture. Or maybe the tool that you use. I know a lot of crime labs don't have the M-Vac, so they're not necessarily getting all of the DNA that they could. As a matter of fact, I had a post-conviction case where it involved a rope, and they swabbed it, not even in the right place, I would say. And then we actually used an M-Vac and got a little bit more information. So, okay, so now...
that actually happens a lot more than what people would think.
Right. And just to give another anecdote here, another post-conviction case I had where we used the M-Vac. The evidence had been swabbed twice previously. And with the M-Vac, we actually still got DNA results. In that particular case, it wasn't probative, but I just thought that was pretty cool that even though we got severely leftover evidence that, by the way, was 35 years old, there was still a result.
Wow.
So, okay,
awesome.
Now the DNA report is written. It goes to the prosecutor. The prosecutor has to understand what exactly that means, because now, these reports might as well be in a foreign language, right? Well, assuming a mixture of 4, there's a 80% contributor, a 20% contributor, likelihood ratio in this scenario is this, all this stuff that it's not straightforward. This is not clinical testing. Like, yeah, we found alcohol in the blood, or we didn't find alcohol. So there really needs to be, before the case is tried or even charged, there needs to be a discussion between the crime lab and the prosecutor so that they understand fully what this means. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, for sure. Right. There's not the time for that. So now,
if I could just interject right here, it's, what you're describing could take months. It's like from the time the crime actually happened and the investigation starts, they gather the evidence, they move it to the crime lab, again, because of some of the backlog that exists, but also just the length of time. If you do it right, an investigation can take a long time.
Absolutely.
And so, in today's environment, it's all a now type of environment. And I'm sorry, investigations don't just work that way. This isn't Gattaca where you can take a little machine and sweep it over the guy's keyboard and you instantly know who did it.
Well, that's a good point, because maybe in the laboratory, actually the extraction, quantitation, amplification, typing, maybe that's done in 2 days, but it's prioritizing the case. There's a backlog. They may not get to it for 3 months.
Right.
Maybe the front end, the evidence exam, that takes a while, on and on. So to actually get a finished report, like you say, is going to take months and months. Sometimes it's a magic bullet. Maybe it's a rape case. Boom, the guy's, it wasn't his semen. That's the end of it.
Right. Right.
But nowadays we're getting a lot more complicated types of answers. So now you move into, perhaps the preliminary hearing. Now the defense gets involved and there has to be production of discovery. And a lot of defense attorneys, they don't know what discovery is. They get the report like, hey, I got the discovery, it says it's my guy and it doesn't look good. And so they have to be educated. Hopefully they have an expert who can at least guide them as to what else needs to be obtained from the crime laboratory so they can fully vet that and decide, listen, because maybe the case will resolve based on the DNA. Hopefully with the input of an expert, say, yeah, this is solid. I don't know what you can do about it. But if it isn't, then, you go to trial, and then prosecution expert testifies, and hopefully there's a thorough cross-examination to bring out any weaknesses so that, the juror gets a full picture of the evidence and what it means. So, now, God forbid there's a conviction and the person is truly innocent. That doesn't get fixed overnight at all. There's a whole process of appeals that have to be exhausted.
Right.
And you wonder how many people, a lot of people are in the justice system for the first time when they're convicted of a serious crime. So they don't know how this all works. And you would tend to just trust that your attorneys know what they're doing and you might take their advice. And I've seen a lot of scary instances where, attorneys are getting paid $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for a murder case. And they're just maybe stipulating to the DNA and not really investigating. And so it could be that a wrongfully convicted person could even just give up hope, hopefully that's not the case. And then hopefully they can dial into a good attorney or an innocence project. But even there, that's going to take months and months, if not years, to get to the point where you can get a DNA test that may actually set them free. So all of that to say is it is so critically important to get this done right on the front end. Right. So that we can prevent this type of miscarriage of justice, which is a miscarriage of justice, and it's a lot of money and time wasted for all sides.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate you explaining that, because there's so many people that watch CSI and other crime shows where they literally have to put the entire crime, the investigation, and the resolution in 43 minutes worth of airtime. And it just doesn't work that way.
Right. Investigation takes a long time.
Right.
Lab work, relatively short, but for the backlogs. But then the litigation takes forever. I mean, there's just pretrial hearing after pretrial hearing before you get anywhere to where you could possibly, have the case resolved or tried. Yeah.
Well, and it's, even for a flawed system, or for a system that is as good as ours is, there are still flaws in it. And I think the number one flaw with our system right now is just how long it takes. But if you start hacking off time, you have to shorten certain things, and then justice is not going to get served. Either the victim is going to get shortchanged because the person that actually committed the crime isn't going to be convicted, or if you shortchange the investigation or the lab processes or anything else, then perhaps somebody that didn't do it is going to get convicted on the other end just based on circumstantial evidence or something like that. And I think one of the biggest problems, again, with the now society is the lack of adult timeframes that many of us lose just because we have the world at our fingertips. We text somebody and we're like mad if they don't respond in 30 seconds. And yet, you equate that over to an investigation and something as serious as convicting somebody for a crime. And again, I'm going to be interviewing a guy next week that served 20 years for a murder he didn't commit.
Oh, wow.
And I can't wait. It's going to be a fascinating interview, but it's amazing that is the exception to the rule, but at the same time it happens. And how you completely eliminate that from happening and still maintain the integrity of the system, I really am not sure if that's possible. But
Well, and what's scary, just going with the wrongful conviction is obviously we've had DNA resolve a lot of those cases recently, almost 400, I think, by the Innocence Project.
Right.
But what percentage of cases where someone's wrongfully convicted actually have DNA evidence? I'm sure an extremely small percentage. So that's great that we can catch it with DNA, but most of the cases, there's not that kind of cross-check.
Well, you would hope that, since DNA just came on the scene, mid-90s, that from that point forward, there would be a less percentage of it, a less chance of a wrongful conviction. There's always going to be flaws, but.
Right. Yes and no. So, I mean, DNA actually was started in criminal investigation mid 80s, but the technologies were clunky. So, initially when you're using RFLP in the mid 1980s, first of all, the testing would take 6 weeks. You would need a lot of DNA. You'd need a blood stain the size of a dime. So even, 80s, 90s, yeah, we had DNA, but it wasn't able to resolve as many cases as it is now, just because of the limitations of the technology. And so there's very often, I'm looking at a post-conviction case and testing that was done 5 years ago. I'm like, that was inconclusive. If we did that today, we could probably get an answer, just with the current evolution of the technology in a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, it's almost like a hockey stick, it's going up so fast that even something that was done, like you said, 5 years ago, if it wasn't done with the latest technology, then perhaps it needs to be run again. And
this is true. Yeah.
Yeah. That's creating even more backlog.
So. Yeah, you're right. If we have to work all these cases twice, I mean, we're never going to get ahead.
Well, which is one resistance to the M-Vac, to be honest.
Yeah.
People are like, yeah, this is a great tool. And clearly there's a significant number of cases that deserve to actually be processed with the M-Vac. But, there's also other factors that come in line with it. And so there's a little bit of resistance there, but whether
I understand it. The labs say, listen, we got enough cases as it is. We can't start. We're not looking for more cases. We should, but we can't. And then, of course, the data you get, with M-Vac, you might get very complicated mixtures and tough samples and all that. Well, some of that I think is put to bed now that we're in the era of probabilistic genotyping. So I think that excuse for getting more complicated data is going away. But I don't know. Sometimes I think of the cartoon, Jared, where, there's like the cavemen and they got the wheelbarrow with the square wheel. And then another caveman comes up with the circle, and taps on the shoulder. They said, no, we don't have time for that. So there may be some of that with technology like the M-Vac, because unfortunately it's very tough for a crime lab to validate a new system. I mean, they've got to pull people off of casework that they're already backlogged on. So even to get some of these advancements, be it the M-Vac or something else, to get them online in a crime lab, it's not an easy thing, and it takes much more time than it should. And like I say, they're not really caught up with the current science, because people have to work cases, and that's just the reality of it.
Well, and it's that's the nature of the beast. There's some labs that we've worked with that literally have a new person that they bring on that is specifically for validating new equipment, not just the M-Vac, but other pieces of equipment, and that's their job. They're not even in working cases anymore. It is their job to make sure that the lab is constantly updated on the latest and greatest. And unfortunately, not all labs can do that. But
no, that is a huge luxury. And I know it's got to be frustrating for the labs that there is a new technology every year, every 6 months or whatever. So you're constantly validating.
Yeah. Well, especially, I'm not sure if you've seen the latest FBI data where they compared the M-Vac with swabbing and taping.
Well, I can't miss it, Jared. I follow you on social media, so it's plastered all over the place.
Yeah. Well, that's my job.
That's right. Yeah.
So, no, but in that, you were talking about, there were cases earlier where they'd been swabbed twice.
Yeah.
And you still got results with the M-Vac. And that's one of the things that the FBI showed, is that even after swabbing, the M-Vac pulled as much as 46 times more than what the swab originally did, which is just pretty amazing. So
that's very cool. And just to give another case example, a post-conviction case, evidence was 20 years old or so. And so we M-Vac'd a bunch of clothing, and we didn't get that perpetrator's profile. We didn't get that one nice profile that we could put in CODIS or something like that. But the fact that the defendant's DNA didn't show up anywhere, there's the old adage, right? Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So defense says, hey, listen, we did this DNA testing. Defendant didn't show up. Great. Prosecutor says, absence of evidence, not evidence of absence. But, you think about it, because DNA testing is now so sensitive, right? Not finding DNA has a lot more meaning. Stack on top of that M-Vac sampling, where you're getting every little crumb of DNA. Now, if you don't find someone's DNA, that has even more meaning. So that starts to chip away at that axiom that, it's there, but you couldn't detect it or something like that.
And interestingly enough, the guy that I'm interviewing next week, that's exactly what happened in his case. And he supposedly was at the crime scene and supposedly did, handled certain things such as the victim's sweatpants and a teddy bear. And so they thought, well, let's MVAC these items and see if, and then we'll get his DNA, and then we'll
Case
be
closed.
100% justified for having him in prison.
Right.
Well, they MVAC'd him in certain places on each one of those items, and they came up with DNA, but not that guy's particular DNA. So then they were like, "Holy crap! We need to really." And you know who I'm talking about, Chris.
Chris Trapp, I imagine.
So then they, like you said earlier, you said they MVAC'd the hell out of it, didn't that? That was a hashtag for a while, wasn't it?
That's right. When the tables were turned and I interviewed you on my podcast, I think we came up with the MVAC the hell out of it.
Anyway, and then they came up with nothing. So then they actually got thinking about what the process was of getting this guy out of prison if there was absolutely no evidence to hold him. So
yeah, there's a lot of I'm looking forward to that episode. There's a lot of components to that case with the genealogy and the DNA from the other person.
Right.
Wow. I mean, that case there's so many issues wrapped into one on that one.
Right. Well, and it's absolutely amazing that they finally caught the guy that did it. What a crazy case that is, especially being in a small town, Idaho. You just don't have that kind of, those kind of cases are once in a lifetime, let alone, very often. So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, yeah, that case is going to be and that interview, I can't wait for it, because Chris Tapp is one amazing individual, and just being able to get him on is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, I remember seeing the video of you actually showing him the MVAC. I mean, what a cool moment that must have been for you.
Oh, that really was. I heard that this is shortly after he was released. I heard that he was going to be up in Boise. So, I threw the MVAC in the back of my car and drove up there, and was able to meet him and show him the system. Yeah, that was actually a very surreal moment. So.
Yeah, it's really good to be able to touch base with the people whose lives are actually affected. And I think working in a crime lab, you could lose sight of that, because you're just looking at test tubes and numbers and all of that. So that's actually one of the things I really enjoy about what I'm doing now, is that, I'm meeting with inmates and just kind of seeing it firsthand.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that detectives and CSIs do what they do, is because they enjoy not only the problem solving aspect of it, but also being able to interact with the people, the community. There's always two sides to it. Both sides obviously have to be equally and justifiably represented. And, that's why one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because I know, in the areas that you work in, number one, you're the epitome of a professional.
Well, thank you.
That you would have a real unique perspective that I think everybody is very interested in.
Yeah. And I mean, just real quick to give my background, I worked in law enforcement crime laboratories first. I've been in forensic science for about 24 years now, 21 of that, specializing in DNA. But my first gig in forensic DNA, I worked here in Southern California, San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department Crime Lab. So I was a criminalist there for about 6 years. At the end of my term there, I was actually the DNA technical leader, person in charge of the technical operations.
Right.
Then a buddy of mine had this crazy idea that we should actually start our own private forensic DNA lab, because obviously the current labs couldn't keep up. There was always a backlog, and it was a great business opportunity. So then
there easier said than done, isn't it?
Easier said than done, absolutely. But So then at that point, again, I was a technical leader, lab director, all of that. But not only did we work with the prosecution, but we started working with the defense, as a private lab. And that's when I first started working directly with inmates. There are a number of people, believe it or not, inmates who actually serve as their own attorney, and they defend themselves. So so that was kind of my, that's why I say I've seen all sides of this. And so now for the last 10 years or so, I'm doing purely defense consulting and post-conviction. So I've had a pretty good 360 view of, how everything works.
So that must be interesting, if an inmate is working as their own attorney. You were talking about how difficult it is to educate some attorneys on DNA.
Right.
What's it like educating an inmate?
It's actually very rewarding. It's kind of funny if you go and sit in front of someone who's got like tattoos all over their face and they look really tough. And that moment you get through to them and they understand the evidence and they understand the meaning and maybe that there's some hope. I mean, that's very rewarding. But ultimately, as a forensic scientist, we have to be able to educate the general public, because ultimately the juror is the consumption of this. So it is the person on the street who's not involved in science or law enforcement that really we have to convey this information to. And that's just the interesting challenge of our justice system.
Right. Oh, it's fascinating. Well, listen, I've kept you a little longer than what I originally intended, and I certainly appreciate you coming on. And I'll tell you, you're a wealth of information, and I will absolutely ask you to come on again if that's all right.
Yeah, let's do it, Jared. I very much enjoyed our discussion.
Okay. Well, you have a great day, and we will talk at you later.
You do the same. Take care, Jared.
Okay.